In this video, we're going to take a look at the guidance offered by the Scotch Whisky Association about cask investment. So welcome back to the channel, everyone, and welcome back to our new set. I'm Mark Littler. I'm a whisky market analyst, whisky consultant and whisky broker, and this video is no way sponsored, endorsed or whatever by the Scotch Whisky Association. We're just taking a look at the Scotch Whisky Association guidance about buying and owning a cask of whisky. Now, who are the Scotch Whisky Association? Well, they're a trade organisation that represents the Scotch whisky industry. So they're not a regulator in the sense of the FCA, for instance, but they're a trade body that protects Scotch whisky. So in terms of advice about cask ownership, they are the gold standard. They are the trade body. They are the people who represent 70 plus distilleries in Scotland. So what they say is gold. Now, as we talked about in our last video, the FBI have just shut down a whisky cask investment scam or fraud, and the Scotch Whisky Association have for a long time acknowledged that fraud and scams have happened, and as far back as 1996, I think this was the first time that they issued their guidance. They issued a pamphlet about cask ownership, and then again they updated that advice in the form of a PDF that you can download, and we'll put the links on that on screen and somewhere now to download. And this was updated in August of 2020. Now, in both instances, it talks about the industry, about the exports, about how wonderful cask ownership is, because there are lots of benefits to you and to the industry. But in this video, we're just going to focus on the safety side of things in terms of ownership transfer. So if we go back to this first instance, this first leaflet that was issued in 1996, it basically says, get a delivery order. But that guidance is 25 plus years old now, so we're going to look at the guidance that was issued in 2020. And specifically, there's one little section on here, and we'll put that on screen for you now. And we're just going to do a line by line breakdown of this pretty much to unpack it, because this is often manipulated by investment companies to their favour. So we always talk about transferring the cask into your own name when you buy a cask, and that's exactly what the Scotch Whisky Association does. But I've seen recently instances where customers have been forwarded emails or sent emails from investment companies that manipulate this guidance. So let's unpack it and take a look at it in detail. So the first part of the guidance that we're looking at here, it says, if the cask is located in a warehouse that belongs to someone other than the seller, right, okay then, so what does that mean? So if the person selling the cask to you does not own the warehouse and storage facility that whiskey is stored in, as in more likely a distillery, for instance, they would own the warehouse. Or for instance, if the warehouse itself, there's a very big place in Creetown that sells casks, but he owns the warehouse. So it's basically saying, like, what's the ownership structure? It says, so if the cask is located in a warehouse that belongs to someone other than the seller, you should ensure that the transfer of ownership is properly recorded and acknowledged by the warehouse keeper. So, in essence, if you're buying a cask from a third-party company, check with the warehouse that's storing that cask that the transfer has been recorded by the warehouse keeper. Next paragraph. Traditionally, this was done by way of a delivery order, a document setting out the details of the cask to be transferred, signed by the purchaser and seller, and delivered out to the warehouse keeper. So this is what we've talked about for a long time. A delivery order is basically a countersigned document that has the cask details on, it's signed by the seller, and it's signed by the buyer. You send it to the warehouse keeper and they update their records, and it essentially transfers the risk and the responsibility from the seller to the buyer. So once the warehouse keeper has acknowledged it, you're going to be responsible for everything such as the rent, etc. going forward. However, this is where things get muddy for these investment companies, and this is what they like to sort of play around on. There's another sentence. Nowadays, an invoice or owner's certificate may suffice. Correct, 100% correct, with a few caveats. There's no law that says how the warehouse keeper should transfer that ownership. It's traditionally done with a delivery order. But if you're buying directly from a distillery, for instance, they may just offer you an ownership certificate, because basically if the warehouse keeper says to transfer this ownership, you've got to come and kiss me under a full moon, you've got to go and kiss them under a full moon. And this is basically the bit there's another sentence now that all these cask investment companies skip. They kind of edit it. They go, oh shit, that doesn't exist. Before completing the purchase, you should check with the warehouse keeper what documents they require and ensure that the seller can deliver them to you. So basically, when you're buying a cask of whiskey, the Scotch Whisky Association guidance as of August 2020 is check with the warehouse what documents they require to transfer the ownership fully into your name. The Scotch Whisky Association doesn't say go and get a Wauga. We talk about that in another video. The Scotch Whisky Association doesn't say let it be stored by another company and give you beneficial title or bailment. The Scotch Whisky Association says get that cask transferred into your own name. So if you don't, and if that company goes bust or anything happens to that cask, don't complain. You know, if you're watching this video and you own a cask of whiskey that's managed by another company and you've not had any formal recognition that that cask belongs to you or even exists in the world, you know, if you had a confirmation that cask is even in the warehouse, then you're putting yourself at risk. And as I said in the last video, the last thing that anybody wants is this industry to be brought into disrepute. So protect yourself and protect the industry. If you haven't got a delivery order or you've not had acknowledgement directly from the warehouse keeper that the cask is held in your name, find out where the cask is lying and call up the warehouse and ask them what documents they require to transfer ownership. So there we have it. It's a quick little video about the guidance that the Scotch Whisky Association has. We'll put the links everywhere so you can go and download it and have a look yourself. And if you've got any questions, get them in the comments below.